Welcome to the continuation of Blender 201. In this demo, I'm actually going to be recreating this scene from scratch, so hopefully that will make things less hectic and a bit easier to understand. However, I'll still have timestamps in the description, so if you just want to jump in at certain points that you think are more relevant, you are free to do so. Just a recap of the scene, this is just a generic cellscape, and I have this controller object that is kind of controlling the distribution and the scale of what I'm just going to say are cancer cells. And I can move them around. And because this is a real-time engine, I'm not putting on too much strain on my system whenever I need to make quick updates, and it allows me to iterate pretty quickly. So if I want to change lighting, I'm free to do so. And yeah, so I'm just going to create a new scene, and I will be right back. Cool, so default scene, default cube. Just before we get started, I'm just going to make sure that my key map preference is set up. So I have my spacebar action set to search. I find that this is a more convenient workflow. It's how I used to work before they switched out the key maps. But yeah, just have that set to search. So I'm just going to switch in. Wait, need to activate my screencast keys. So I'm going to just tab into orthographic view just to make things a bit easier to navigate. And I'm going to move this cube off because I still want it later. And I'm going to just add a curve to create our tunnel path. And I'm going to extrude this. Oh, I'm just going to line up to the side. I'm just going to move that. So G to grab and E to extrude. I'm going to keep on extruding upwards. Move that around. Move this around. Give it a bit of irregularity, and that looks pretty good. If you added a curve and just scaled it, so if I did this, it's up here, and you try doing the same thing. Wait, scaling it, and we try giving both these some thickness. So this one was purely I just moved the points around. I didn't scale anything. So if I go into the curve submenu and then geometry, bevel round, I give some depth. This one goes perfectly round. This one it'll have a bit of stretching. And that's because you need to apply the transformation. This is the equivalent of freezing a transformation in Maya. So you just need to click Control A, scale, and it should snap right back. So we have our tunnel. I'm just going to keep on increasing our thickness a bit, our depth. That looks pretty good, but I want to give it a bit of thinning areas. So I'm going to just tab into edit mode again, and I want to scale along the normal. So Alt S. I want to make the top a bit narrower. Maybe here. That's not enough. All right. Maybe this one a bit narrower too. You can enable soft select by hitting O and just scrolling with your mouse wheel. That looks pretty decent. So I'm going to duplicate this and put it into a new collection just for reference, and if I need this later. So M, new collection, and I'm just call this ref for reference. We'll hide that. So now we have our base geometry, and if we really wanted to, I'm going to give it a bit of irregularity in geometry. So I'm going to add these. Wait, I need to convert this to mesh first because right now this is just points, and I need to affect vertices. So spacebar, convert to mesh. And right now, if you would have seen the icon change from a curve to some vertices. So you know that's converted to a mesh. So I can add a displace modifier. Again, it's the wrench tab. And right now, it's just displacing everything evenly. So I want to create basically some noise. So new texture, texture tab. I'm going to use clouds. Clouds is basically noise. And right now, it's a bit, you can fiddle with the settings. I'm going to probably go back to the default. It's fine for my preference. And to smooth it out, you just need to use a subdivision surface. This is comparable to, again, Using smoothing in Maya, your smoothing levels, your levels viewport is going to be what you see in the viewport at the moment, and render is what you see when it renders. So it helps optimize the scene a bit. And to just put our camera into view, you can go back into perspective mode by hitting 5 again, hitting Control Alt and O on your number pad, and you can manipulate the view of the camera within the scene by just going into camera to view and just panning around and zooming and then making sure it's to your preference. So my preference in terms of setup for this kind of scene is to have a 4-quadrant scene. So I will duplicate this, and right now it's just set to layout 01. You can rename that if you want by just double clicking it and renaming it, but I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm going to move this up so I have more space, and I'm going to drag in another window. So you can go to the corner once you see the crosshairs, drag it out. Same thing for the bottom. And I'm going to switch this to geometry nodes and switch this to shader editor. So right now, I'm going to move that out of the way and go back into orthographic in this viewport. Right now, if we were to, you can scroll if it's hidden right now. If we just go into rendered view, it's pretty dark because we don't have any lights, or at least lights that are visible within the scene of our camera. So I'm going to just move this light, position it right over the top, and we're starting to get some things back. It's not particularly aesthetic right now. Fix that a bit. So I'm going to change the light type from a point light to a spotlight to give it a bit more directionality, and because I want that volumetric God ray effect. And I'm going to tighten up the blend because I want really tight beams of light, and I'm going to bring down the size of it. Move that a bit. And it's a bit off to the side. I'm going to rotate it by hitting R. Oh, my screencast keys are. They're back. They're probably, screencast keys are probably a bit too large right now. Let's go 20. All right. So we have this view. And right now there's nothing happening, so I'm going to start adding some volumetrics. So in a lot of softwares, you usually enable volumetrics in some sort of world settings. In Blender, you can just create some geometry and have it contained within that area. I find it's a lot easier to work with, and it's less heavier on the computer. So I'm just going to tab into wireframe view using the Z key. I'm going to grab these vertices, move them this way. Oh, soft select is getting in the way, so I'm just going to disable it for now. Move it this way, rotate that a bit, scale it so it encompasses it, scale this too. Extrude that, rotate that a bit, extrude that again, move that up. That looks pretty good. Cool. So I'm going to give this a volumetrics material. So this is shader ball at the bottom, and new material. And right now the default material is printable BSDF. This is your standard Uber shader that you would find if you were working in ProRender, Arnold, RenderMan, whatnot. So right now it's affecting the surface, and we don't want surface. So I'm going to disconnect it by clicking that and remove. So you notice that this was our shader graph view. You can technically disconnect it here by just clicking and deleting it. And I want to replace it with a volume. So you can go click on the volume submenu and select principled volume. You'll see that this also just connected itself to the volume node. So right now our density is set to like 1, so 100%. That's not letting any light pass through. So I find that starting off at 0.05 is a good starting point. And gray fog isn't particularly interesting, so I'm going to mess around and let's say maybe some bluish. I'm going to copy that to copy down to like absorption. You can mess with the value a bit. You'll notice that once we increase the density, you can get that blue tint, but that's a bit too strong right now. You can just increase the saturation to your liking. And this is in part because we haven't done any indirect lighting, so we'll add that right now. So Shift A, irradiance volume, it's under light probes, and then I'm going to scale it so it aligns to conforms to the shape of our tunnel. Again, I'm just going to tab into orthographic view so it's easier to align things. Right now, if this is getting in the way, you can just switch it to a wire view by going into object data and viewport display. Instead of textured, we're going to set to wire, so it's not obstructing anything anymore. And because I want this to conform to the actual shape of our tunnel, I'm going to duplicate the radiance volume and just rotate it. Ideally, I would be able to manipulate the light probes independently, similar to in Unity, but it is what it is. We're stuck with this box configuration. So I'm just going to duplicate that, Shift D. I'm going to rotate that. And probably rotate it. I can probably fit that in. So what I'm doing right now is just trying to scale it while constraining to the axis. I'm having some outside of them, outside of the tunnel, but it's not, I don't think it's going to be too bad. We'll see later. I need to fill in this gap right now. So I'm going to duplicate that again, rotate it. I'm going to scale it along this axis, rotate it again. Try to get it to overlap and fit the gap. Alright, so I'm going to start baking our lighting to see what it looks like. And at this point, you should probably be enabling your screen space reflections and all your post-processing effects. So ambient occlusion, just deselect that's getting in the way. Occlusion, bloom, screen space reflections. So if you just toggle that off, you'll notice that there's a fair difference in our illumination right now. And going to indirect lighting, I'm gonna bake it a bit. And it's getting a bit more pleasant to look at. I'm going to activate our SSGI. So mine is yep. Okay, add SSGI. Update SSGI materials. Okay, it's already done that. I'm going to rebake everything. Okay, I think it's done. Yep. Cool. So I'm just going to change the lighting of our lamp. And I'm going to increase the lighting because right now I feel it's a bit soft. Maybe 60,000. This was just the value I came up with. Oh. We'll do that. We'll keep that for now. Maybe I'll turn this to more of a violet kind of. And because I wanted volumetric God rays, I'm going to create a gobo. And I'm going to create a physical gobo because in a real-time engine, it doesn't really those kind of those stencils on lights that you find in Arnold, those don't really work in a real-time engine. So I'm just going to create one physically really quickly, tab in edit mode, and I'm going to subdivide. So Control E, subdivide, and I'm going to increase the subdivisions by clicking there. And I'm going to go into face mode. You can do that by either hitting 3 or just clicking on the face button. And I'm going to search up checker deselect. Alternatively, you can actually just search up random. Oh, you have to deselect everything first. Random and I find that for this use case, checker deselect is the better option, so I'm just going to go back with that. Cool. So I'm going to delete those faces. So X to delete and faces. And I'm gonna rotate this. I'm gonna reset the rotation for this, and I'm gonna parent it. So I just hit Alt R. That resets the rotation. I'm gonna parent that. So I'll Shift click. The last thing we click is gonna be the object we're parenting it to. So Control P. Parent to object. This will just copy the rotations, equations, transforms basically. I'm gonna rotate it back. I'm gonna move this a bit and move this down a bit too. It's a bit large, so I'm gonna. Okay, that looks a bit better. Maybe this is a bit narrower. Let's hide that. I'm going to enable contact shadows. That gives me a bit more realistic. And again, because of the way rasterized rendering works, it's basically projecting the scene into pixels. A lot of your settings are going to be in pixel values. So under shadows, you're going to notice that these are in pixel values. The higher the value, so particularly cube size, the softer your shadows are going to be. You're not going to have to deal with as many anti-aliasing issues. And make sure you have soft shadows enabled. If that's not enough, high bit depth should help. So check my other settings. Refraction. If you plan on having any refractive materials like glass, you would want to enable that. Let's see what I want to change here. I think I'm gonna start creating my cell system. So I'm just gonna drag this out to make some space. So click on your scaffolding object and go into the modifiers tab and click geometry nodes. That should create a new geometry node system. And by default, if you click out or select something else, it's gonna like sometimes it'll hide this and you have to re-click on the modifier itself to get it back. So we have this our scaffolding object set up, and I'm going to take our cube that we kept, and I'm going to turn it into our cell. So I'm going to subdivide it a few times because I don't want to use a UV sphere because of the pole issues. Subdivide by Control E, subdivide a few times. Increase the number of cuts to say 3 for now, and I'm going to turn it into a sphere by searching up to sphere and hit 1, so like 100%. Smooth our normals by right-clicking, shade smooth, and let's see. I'm going to add another displacement modifier. I'm going to reuse our texture from earlier. It's a bit too strong, so I'm going to pull down the strength. I'm going to move that up so it smoothes out. And I'm just click back on our tunnel. So in order to instance this object along the vertices, you need to use a point instance node. So Shift A. You can technically access it from the submenu, or you can search it up. I just find it's easier and faster, so I'm going to search up point instance. Right now, we've essentially replaced our scaffolding object with our instance, but we have nothing selected. So we're going to use the eyedropper, select our cube, and right now this is probably not ideal. Yeah, so I'm gonna move this above our subdivisions because right now we're creating more instances than I would like. Let that unfreeze for a bit. Okay, there we go. And right now you're probably noticing that a lot of these they're basically not aligned to the normals. They're basically just straight up and down. So you want to visualize that a bit easier. I'm going to create a new iconosphere. Move that out of the way. Scale that a bit. I'm going to copy the node system. Yep. And I want to randomize the rotation a bit. So I'm going to use point distribute. Again, point. Oh, that's not what I want. So things just start chugging in for a bit. So I'm just going to. I lowered the resolution, I think. So I'm just going to add a point distribute to randomize things a bit. Point distribute. Drop that in, and right now it's basically randomized it to fit our sphere. And but they're clustered way too close together, and it's probably a bit too dense for our liking. I'm going to switch to Poisson disk algorithm because this allows us a bit more control on the distance between our instances. If it's closer than that prescribed distance, it just won't create. It won't appear. So I'm gonna see. This looks good. That's how it looks here. It's a bit large. And I want to start messing with the size. So I'm going to go into randomize, attribute randomize. So attribute randomize, drop that in. And I'm going to, by default, it's a float, and we want to be affecting a vector. So X, Y, Z. And I'm going to use the scale attribute. They have a set of predefined attributes you can manipulate. So scale is one of them. And right now, you can affect each axis individually. So I'm going to change this so that it's 0.5 for each. I think I'm going to lower it a bit more. So 0.1, 0.1. And so it's not as large. I'm going to drop this to 0.5. Maybe closer to 0.3. All right. I'm going to increase the density a bit so it covers our 2-bit better, and I'm going to drop the distance. But basically, by default, point distribute will also align to the normals for you, but it will no longer be along the actual vertices of our scaffolding object. If you wanted to create something that did align to it, you would have, but didn't randomize, that didn't distribute itself randomly, you would need to use align to aligned rotation to vectors. And your settings would essentially be switching this to attribute and writing normals because you want to align to the normals. So I don't need that, so I'm just going to remove that from our system. I'm going to delete this because this was just for visualization purposes. And it's chugging on it. It's causing our viewport to chug. So I'm going to enable Poisson disk again. And it's randomly distributed. So I want to also rotate things randomly. So I'm going to duplicate this attribute randomize, change it to rotation, because that's also another attribute it recognizes. Maybe give it a bit more, give more leeway to rotate freely. So I'm going to remove it because we already have a subdivision surface modifier here, and it's lower than our geometry nodes. It's applying this onto our instance object, so it's kind of redundant at this point. Just gonna go back in our view. It's a bit tight, so it might help to decrease our size of the scale. That looks good. I'm gonna enable the passepartout for our cameras so we know specifically what's in our view. So viewport display, we have to select the camera first, then go to a viewport display. Cool. So I'm just gonna go back into our rendered view, and okay, that looks okay. I'm gonna give this some material. Move that out of the way. So you could technically do some of this within the materials tab if you just want a pretty simple material. So oh. So I basically realized that having the subdivision modifier um, beneath the geometry node modifier was causing some issues, so I just shifted over top. It should take care of some of the chugging issues I was having earlier. So I'm just going to go back in the rendered view, select what's to be our cell again, and I'm going to actually create a new collection for it. Cells, normal, and I'm going to increase our subsurface. You can preview it here too. Right now you can see that we're getting subsurface, which is great. That's something we would normally have issues with in say like Arnold. I'm gonna add a I'll deal with that later. Just gonna give it a bit of color. You'll notice that we do get this global illumination now. Again, just gonna fiddle around a bit. Increase our. Gonna rotate it. That might take care of our hotspot. Oh, I'm liking this. That's probably just the bloom being too strong, but that's something to worry about later. Maybe if I. Oh. Yeah, we're giving ourselves a bit of a color cast right now, but I don't really want that, so I'm going to go back to our old value. Probably turn our subsurface because we realistically don't need that much. 0.2. Make this more of a, I guess, a fleshy color. Now it's a bit purple, but I guess it's okay. Make this less saturated. That looks better. And I'm going to duplicate the cells to give this a bit of variation, so it's not just like one color of cell. Come back to that later. And to give it, if you're satisfied with having just smooth cells, that's totally cool. I'm going to give it some texture, so texture, noise. I'm going to create mapping node. It gives us better control over the coordinates. So vector to vector, texture coordinates, and this, because this is a procedural texture and I don't have UVs, I'm just going to use generated. So vector to vector. Yep. And I'm going to use a normal map for this. So colors to color. Oh, nope, I don't want it affecting clear coat. This might take a while. Okay. And while this is technically a real-time engine, creating more like very complex materials that have like very extensive node systems will cause it to slow down a bit. That's the precaution. It looks like our noise is a bit too large and a bit too strong, so I'm gonna drop that to maybe 0.2 and change our scale here to 555. That sounds like pizza delivery number. That's looking a bit better. Okay, I don't like how jagged it is, so can add subdivision. I mean, you could use smooth. No, I don't think there's enough geometry there, so I'm going to use subdivision smooth. Subdivision surface. Okay, that takes care of it. Increase the size of that. If you wanted to create a slightly more complex map, I'm just gonna duplicate this. Use a Voronoi texture instead, and put that into a vector. And I'm going to use a look up mix RGB. That allows me to blend things together. And I gotta look up a bump map. And I'm gonna put these together. Just wait for it to compile again. Because again, like most game engines, you need to compile your shaders before it actually runs. Probably a bit too, yeah, our strength is a bit too high. Okay, we just had our nodes connected a bit wrong, so it's distance to normal. Oops, distance to height. Okay, shader finished compiling. There we go. And looks like our Voronoi needs to be inverted because we want it to be convex, not concave. I'm just gonna invert. Oh, that's good. Maybe drop the strength a bit. Okay, I'm just gonna tweak the material a bit more. That's a bit too much. It's a bit too saturated still. Okay, I like that. It's a lot more muted. And again, if you're noticing this kind of dithering effect in the indirect light in the GI, that's because again a lot of this is post-processing as a screen space effect. So it only calculates what's within the frustum of the camera, and again I choose to block out the outside so I have a more representative image of what it would look like when it's rendered out at full view. Because this is basically obstructing what's not within the frustum of the camera. I don't like that hole. I need to select the geometry nodes again. There we go. Gonna change the seed value. Hopefully that fills the hole. Yep. Okay, that takes care of the hole. So back to our second cell. I'm just gonna rename that to normal 2. And to copy the modifiers, because I did have a displacement, I mean a subdivision, not subsurface. You just control shift click, and again the last object that you've clicked, the one with the yellow highlighting, that will be the source object. So copy modifiers, and we've got it smoothed out. So to give it a bit more variation, you can create another instance of the material by just hovering over the number and clicking it. So now you know how many versions of the material there are. This is now a unique version of the material. So I'm going to change it. Probably move that over so I can get a better view. It's a bit too saturated. I want it to be a bit darker than the other one. And again, I put these in the same collection for a reason. So let's move back into our view. Let me just move this out of the way. So if we look at our point instance node, originally it was set to object, so that's only instancing one object. If I want to instance from the whole collection, I can switch to collection, specify cells, and make sure I uncheck whole collection. And let's change the color of this a bit more. Okay, that looks pretty decent. So now I'm going to create our controller for controlling cancer growth. So I'm just going to turn this off for now because it's just distracting. So go back to our node system, and again, because it's a node system, we can take a nonlinear branching approach, and we can join different geometry together that we've created within the system by using a join node, join geometry. And I'm just going to go back in our source object, our scaffolding objects, and create a vertex group from all of these. So select all, go back to your vertex data, geometry data, create a new vertex group, and make sure you remember what you call this. I'm going to call this all. Oh, that's 3. And assign it weight. Yeah, so basically this, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a vertex proximity modifier and make sure it's above our geometry nodes so that it's feeding the vertex weight data into the geometry nodes. So I'm going to make sure I've selected the all vertex group, and I'm going to create the controller, create an empty. This is the equivalent of a null object if you're coming from C4D. So I'm going to use a sphere because it's just easier to grab. Move that out of the way and select it. And we don't have anything happening right now because we have nothing set up. Wait, I'm going to change the fall off to, to, to smooth so it's not as harsh. We'll go back to our objects. You need to click on geometry nodes again. And to integrate our vertex weight, we're going to use an attribute mix. Oh, that's not the wrong right. That's the right node. So attribute mix. And this is just a bit of math. So again, if you're familiar with scripting, this will feel a bit familiar. So I'm going to use multiply because I want to multiply the value. And the factor we're changing is not a factor at all. It's actually an attribute. So you can see that it's coordinating right now. And I'm going to use all because I want to, the attribute we're affecting is basically our vertex group. And scale is an attribute, so that looks right. And B, we want to change to a float, so a floating point value. This is going to be our floor. If you're coming from scripting, this is going to be like math floor. So this is going to be the bottom value that we can scale down to. And I want the height. I want it to be able to scale down to 0, so it's completely hidden. So I'm going to set to the 0. Change this to scale. Change this to scale. And you'll notice that it's hidden everything. So I'm just going to remove that and create a branch of that. And I'm going to create some cancer cells right now because we need something to instance first. So go back to there, duplicate this, move that out of the way, and I'm going to move it into a different collection. So new collection, cancer, rename this to cancer as well. Change the materials so that it's not like redundant. Create a copy of that. Change the color to something darker. Go back to our geometry system. And if you find it more convenient, you can just recolor this by going to our node, dealing color, and to help you differentiate between your two systems. I'm going to change that to blue. And you can technically rename it by checking label like normal. And then I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to switch an object, cancer, and I'm going to move that out of the way because I want to affect the randomization, the scale of the cancer cells independently. And again, taking advantage of this is a node-based network, and it's nonlinear. I'm going to duplicate these. I'm going to drop. Okay, I have to manually connect them. So again, control, right-click. You can use to cut your nodes, your node network. Because I don't want these to be essentially have the matching scales and whatnot. And plug. Rename this. And I'm going to join these two networks together. Now we're seeing some things change because I just increased the highest value you can have. So, solid view. if you look at the wireframe view, you can see that we are affecting geometry. So I'm going to go back to rendered view. Go back to our node system, and I'm going to change, because right now it's matching, and we want to change it in pin. That's why I copy the nodes differently. But rotation, I'm going to mute this, because I probably don't need that. Let's go with 2. Oh, yep, now we're talking. 0.7, 0.7, 0.7, and let me just change the color to something not as saturated. If you really want to, you could actually just use another displacement and increase the strength. So give it a bit more variety. So that's that's the cancer. Now it's just a bit jagged. And so you've noticed that we've essentially created the cloner. We've cloned the cloner tool really from C4D, and that's true. Because again, this is a visual scripting system. This allows us a lot of extensibility in terms of what we can do with our tools. So if we were to work this up a bit further, and we could actually turn this into an LOD system, a level of detail system for further optimization. So if I open up this is an LOD system I made that's based on the camera's position. So objects closer to the camera are more detailed than they appear. So again, I've made the topology visible. So this is the high res, this is the low res. So if you go into our camera view, as I move it along, you'll see things just flipping in and out. And that's just another way for scene optimization. And C4D also has this functionality, so if you want to rebuild this, that is also a thing you can do, but that is a completely different tutorial. Okay, I think the reason, yeah, we need to put this. My original demo file had this angle isn't as steep, so that's why we're not getting as the God rays we want. So I'm just gonna move that down. Volumetrics, there we go. We're getting the angle we want. That's now we're talking. Okay, now it isn't as dark. This feels like it's very Indiana Jones right now. So I think this is a good time to rebake our lighting because we've changed it significantly. I'm gonna pause that for now. Cool. It's finished baking. It's a bit too bright, but it looks good. It's just need to turn down the brightness. Probably increase our fog. Gonna try rotating our gobo. Where's our light? There we go. Yeah, I like the regularity we're getting from that. Okay, cool. Um, Everything else, let's see. So this value right here, this is basically our radius that we're affecting. So the larger it is, the larger the radius, and it's not going to be dependent on the size of our control object. That you would need to attach a driver or a set-driven key if you're coming from Maya. So I'm going to turn that down a bit, move that over there. Yeah, maybe I should enable this. It's not going to do much. Or maybe it is. Just going to go back to our cancer cell. This is a cancer. Yeah, it's cancer. I'm going to just drop the darkness a bit. Okay, that looks better. Yeah, we have volumetrics, we have subsurface, and we are not chugging, or not that much really. I'm gonna reposition the camera a bit. You can change your camera focal length by going into your camera settings. I'm gonna go to 18. I want it wide. Just go. Oh, oh. Maybe I should change the seed value to hide that hole. Okay, looks pretty good. I'll rotate that a bit. Okay, go back to camera to view. Just hide this. Okay, it might be a bit too wide, so 35. Okay, that looks better. I'm gonna turn this around and disable camera view so we don't move the controller so we're not overlapping anymore. Oh. Okay, I like that. This is just more touch up. You can enable depth of field right now if you wanted to. And I'm gonna say create a focal object by creating another empty. Hide that, it's getting in the way. Move it over here. You could also use your controller object as your focal controller, but I want a bit more independence. So go back to our camera. Eyedropper tool, and I'm gonna open up the aperture a bit. So let's see. I'm gonna go 1.2. Okay, I like that. And you can move that around. Yep, I like that. Maybe just move this controller. Move our light. Yeah, you probably don't want to make this part as steep. I think that was one of the differences that from my original version. But it is what it is. It still looks pretty decent, I'd say. Make this a bit wider. Wider. Again, this is a real-time engine, so we do have the flexibility to iterate and not have to wait for a full sample calculation. turn down roughness. I want that, I guess, the kind of a moist look. And it also helps with our bokeh, our depth of field stuff. Okay, that looks good. Let me. All right. If you wanted to recreate the fiber and collagen stuff in the original, you can go. There's actually an add-on for that. It comes with Blender. They just deactivate by default for save on memory, but IVGen, enable that. If you want to create blood vessels, you can use the tree generator. So that's called sapling tree, and that's kind of a hack I use to create blood vessels because blood vessels are really just branching networks, and it's gonna be blurred out, so no one's gonna notice. So go back to our ref. I'm going to enable that again. Select that. I'm going to give an offset. Going to duplicate first and convert this to mesh. Offset it a bit. Because we need a proxy object to attach our to really adhere our IV to. So I'm just going to select a point. It's there. Cursor to selected, so Shift S, cursor to selected. That's where we're going to be adding our IV. So it's actually it's on our sidebar. So I'm going to hit N to pull in the view. Might have to dig around for it. So it should be under Create. There we go. IV generator. Deactivate leaves because we don't want leaves. Where is? There it is. You can tweak it around. I'm going to recenter the origin. So with it selected, I'm going to look up origin to geometry. So that should reset our origin a bit. Just going to move that around. So I'm going to R twice instead of just free rotate. Just create. Oh, this is not the mode we want. Need to hide. Well, hide the proxy object later. Never create that new IV again. Maybe change our seed value. Okay, I don't like that. So maybe max IV length is 2. Oh, now it's a good. It's getting wild. If I deactivate this, and I can move that up because it's blurred out right now. You can't really see it. I'm going to give it a new material. And again, this is real-time engines will default to material being opaque. So if you want to create a glassy kind of material, you have to specifically set it to being transmissive. So alpha blend, alpha hash. You can actually hide shadows if you wanted to by saying shadows none, but that's not really relevant to what I want. Screen space refractions, subsurface translucency, enable that. I'm going to make sure that I have fraction enabled. Okay, I do. And let's see, transmission is 100. I'm going to deactivate show backface because that's creating artifacts right now. Drop our rough. I'm going to leave roughness for now. Drop trans. I don't want full transmission either. You can just fiddle around with this. tint this blue a bit. Hide overlays by oh, okay. Go back. I need my overlays back. If you want to increase your thickness, it's under your bevel. It's under basically your geometry. So right now we're just increasing thickness. And making sure that it's not so saturated. Maybe drop our roughness to make it more reflective. And you can duplicate this a few times. Change that material to 5. Okay, I'm just gonna say that's just worth fiddling on your own time, but blood vessel is pretty easy. It should be under your curves, sapling generator. Yeah, sapling tree generator. You don't want to, I already clicked it, but basically don't click anything. So you want to change your settings. There are some presets here. Pick whatever you want. I'm going to go with this random one. Rotate. Okay, that's probably not the best choice. I just clicked that already. That's not the one we want. Okay, maybe this one. Scale it down. Rotate it. And if you remember our proxy object, it's this one because we know it has the vertex kind of symbol. And this is kind of my hack for doing blood vessels. This is one of the hacks I use for creating blood vessels. But there is a modifier called shrink wrap. We're going to use our target as our proxy object as our target. And right now it's just sticking to everything. I'm going to turn that off for a bit. We probably need to flatten this first. So I'm going to scale to 0. So I'm going to constrain it along Z. So 0. That flattens it out. Rotate it a bit. You can position however you want. And enable that again. And now you'll see that it's behaving a bit better. And you could easily replace all these cells with red blood, with endothelium if you want a blood vessel. That's pretty easy to do. And you'll notice that right now there's a bunch of deformities, and that's not what we want. We'll fix that right now. Apply the modifier. It pops right back up. If you're finding that it's a bit too jagged, you can add a subdivision surface. That'll smooth that out a bit. Wait. Apply that. And the scaling is causing us to have some weird dimension issues. So I'm going to apply scale. There we go. And if you want to just tweak you can it's still a curve. So just tab in edit mode, grab a point. If you want more subdivisions, again, subdivide, and you have another control point there. The materials I'm just gonna copy from this. You can tweak it a bit if you want. So that's called material. I'm also gonna select material, create a copy of that, and just set this to red. Probably turn that back to render view. It's a bit bright. I'm going to turn down our light a bit. And we're not really changing much right now because our light is still baked. Our light map is still baked, so I'm just gonna rebake it. So I mostly just did some fiddling around to see what settings would work, but I think the main issue is that don't put your angle steep. That was basically the main lighting issue. But yeah, you can technically just render this out. The camera's camera blur, the one that is already attached to the camera, that will increase render time slightly. However, you can always just export the render as a multi-layer EXR because it will include render passes, um, and just do your post processing to blur out the background from there. So um, yeah, if I do that, then let's see. Well, let's just see how it renders right now. Let me. Okay, it's like 12 seconds, and you can do like whatever post processing you want from there. But yeah, everything from here is just tweaking. I might just show um, compositing here. So if you go into your like render layers, you'll find that you do have a lot of your basic render passes. Main difference being that you anything because this is not ray tracing, anything that requires like global illumination will not be available for so like indirect lighting, indirect transmission. That stuff is not available in the context of a rasterized rendering engine. So you could just go filter, no, defocus, plug that in, plug the Z value in using the inbuilt Z buffer, and everything here is just like say 60, and just drop it to like point. You'll notice this in the compositing, and that's just the nature of it. But usually, if you already have it's not going to be as big of a deal because it's going to be moving, unless you have like a static